Hello, welcome back to my video. And yes, I am in the car because this is the only place that I could hide from my child so that he will not be all over my face. But anyhow, if you're looking for an overview of a hospital chaplaincy, then I talked about that in my previous video. I will put the link in the description box below, so please check it out. This video is about practical tips that I find useful during my internship and my chaplaincy, so hopefully you'll find them useful too. Let's start with what I wear. This is not what I wear during my hospital chaplaincy. We usually don't have a uniform. However, I know some hospital chaplains that wear hospital scrubs like nurses, but the challenge that I encountered during my time was they always confuse me with someone else, like some other staff in the hospital. So I have to put a lot of thought into what I wear, and I'm very short, and people don't usually believe that I'm a hospital chaplain. Plus, most of them only know male chaplains, so there's that other challenge. So I try my best to look professional and presentable all the time. So here are 3 types of uniform that I usually wear during my hospital chaplaincy. Hi, so this is what I typically wear when I do my chaplaincy. I always wear a blazer because I find it very helpful. I know it's 2021, but for some reason, the ladies' pants, the pockets are still fake. They're just there, but you can't put anything. They're not functional. So I find that if I have a blazer with pockets, it's very, very helpful because I always bring a little notebook like this, and this is where I write important details that will help me with my charting later on, or when I revisit the patient. If I write something important here, that guides me with the conversation and how will I go along with the visit. And of course, we need to have our ID. I can't show it for reasons, security reasons, but always put it here, and then I always make sure that they can see my name because my role is written there so that they'll know who I am, and a pen because you always need it. You're gonna be writing, so I always keep my pen. And then flat shoes. Flat shoes for me is a must. I learned my lesson on my very first day. I wore my beautiful shoes, but they're 3 inches of heels, and I walked a lot during that day, and at the end of the day I ended up with 8 blisters. So no, not worth it. So I'll recommend, if you have flat shoes, comfortable flat shoes, invest in them because they're gonna be really worth it. But what I noticed, this is just one of what I usually wear, slacks, blouse and blazer, but what I noticed was people from palliative care or those who are from the hospice and stuff like that kind of wear something similar. So people confuse me with them, confuse me as a chaplain to those staff as well, and people from social work, they wear something similar. So I vary my what I wear because of that reason, and I'll show maybe a couple more just to show you what I usually wear. For me, it's very important because we do a lot of walking, so putting thought into what we wear matters. And because we usually deal with death, I try to wear not really bright ones, but not too gloomy because of the situation or the kind of work that we already do. So I just put a little bit of color just to, you know, brighten up the situation a little bit, at least on my end. But I make sure that I don't cake my face with makeup or overdo the accessories and stuff like that, because when I believe that when we enter into that sacred space with the patient or with the employee, the moment should be about them. And my uniform, my outfit, my accessories, and all of that shouldn't take that moment from them. Even as simple as what we wear, for me, it matters. So that's why this is what I usually wear. And because people also grieve differently and react to loss differently, we should always be ready for any reaction. So I find that if I wear slacks, it's really helpful, because they don't recommend that we catch them if they fall, those people that we care for. That's why we have the professionals to do it. But just in case you're the only one there, and just to help a little bit, this helps with the bending, with the picking up all things, and assisting them with sitting down, stuff like that. I find that pants are helpful because they're not revealing anything. So I hope you find that useful. It's one of the questions that I always get a lot, especially to those incoming students or incoming ministers that want, female ministers that want to be chaplains. They ask me, what do you usually wear? Because it's easier for guys to have the dress code, and others who come from a different religion, like Catholic, priests and nuns. You can tell the moment that they walk in, you can tell that they're chaplains. But for me, I'm from a Southern Baptist denomination, and they can't tell that I'm a minister the moment I walk in. I could be any other staff from the hospital. So that's why I always think about how I present myself with the patients and the employees. So this is one of the typical uniform that I wear. Again, blazer, because pockets are a must. Again, the notebook that I always keep with me to write important details, and ID, and a pen. And my dress, I always make sure that it's below the knee, just so when I'm picking something up, or I'm helping somebody, or I'm rushing or walking really fast, nothing is compromised, and I'm more comfortable that way. It's also about your comfort, because you're gonna be there for a long period of time, and most of the time we're standing, we're brisk walking, if there are emergency calls in the ER. And again, flat shoes for me are a must. They never fail me. So I always invest in good flat shoes, just so I can stand all day without problems. Dress code is just formal, you know, that's the only thing that they tell you. But for me, at the end of the day, we still represent the hospital, so we have to make sure that we remain professional, and it's the same as how we act and we dress as well. But these shoes, I'm wearing a 2 inches heels with this one, but I've tried and tested it, and I survived, and I was comfortable enough. But I don't wear it often. I always choose my flat ones with no heels. And why I emphasize that so much is because on my experience, because walking and standing a lot, you know, you have to be in good shoes in order to endure that, and again do it the following day with the same energy and enthusiasm. According to my app that follows my steps, my typical day of walking when I was doing my internship was 5 to 7 miles a day. Yes, it's because it's a big hospital. It has 7 floors, and we walk back and forth, and those steps can really add up. So having a good, comfortable shoes are very, very important. But if you notice, I'm not wearing any blazer with this, because this dress has pockets, which I know most ladies will like, because it's, you know, it's convenient. So I can keep my small notebook here that again I write important things or details that I need for charting or for my follow-up visits, and then I have something to put my ID and my pen. But hospitals can get cold, so I am always prepared, and I still wear a blazer, or yeah, you can consider this a blazer. Yeah, Here you go. So my ID still shows and it still looks formal, but I'm not gonna be freezing, especially if you do night shifts. It can get really cold, and it's in the ER as well, and ICUs. I find that the temperature there is colder than the rest of the rooms in the hospital. So I always have a handy blazer with me, and still with pockets just in case. And I need to have something to put on my pager if I'm doing the calls for that day or for that night. And let me show you the 3 inches that I was talking about. See, these look comfy. They look very formal, but they're 3 inches. And yes, I ended up with 8 blisters at the end of my, I guess, 9-hour shift that day. So not good for me. I would not recommend. And something that they will at least our office will tell us is no open toes. These look formal. It can be formal, but because it's open toes here, your toes are showing, they will not allow it, because again, you're still working in the hospital and it needs to be sterile and all of that, just for your own protection as well, because all kinds of fluid, you know, hopefully will not end up on you, but it can. So having the closed toe shoes is very important. I just find it helpful because nobody guided me in that way or recommended something, so I just played with what I have, and with wearing them in the hospital, I found what works best for me. So hopefully that will help you if you're thinking of doing chaplaincy in the hospital as well. Now that we've gone over the outfits, let's move on to everyone's favorite topic, sleeping. Now, where do we sleep, or do we even get a chance to sleep? Depending on your shifts, maybe an overnight shift or a weekend shift, then that's where your resting or sleeping quarters is going to be. In my experience, we are allowed to rest in both the office or in a room in the maternity department. I find it easier in the hospital where I'm in to rest in the office if I'm just doing a night shift, because it's closer to the ER. However, for the weekend shift, which is longer, I prefer to stay in the maternity department, the room that's assigned for us, because I can leave my suitcase, I can organize my things better, and rest better. And this is what it usually look like. You have your typical hospital bed with all the buttons and the phone. I find it very convenient because every time I get a call, I don't have to go around looking for a phone. It's literally right there attached to the bed, so I just have to use that and call. And also, it has a complete bathroom, toilet, bathtub, sink, mirror, all of that. So it's really comforting to have that, especially if you're staying the entire weekend. You can really have the time to rest, hopefully, if there's not a lot of call. But I find staying in the room in the maternity department more convenient if I'm staying the overnight shift. So tip number 1 regarding sleeping is to know where the sleeping quarters are in relation to where you need to be for active duty. For the weekend shifts, I did 65 hours straight. And that's not always the case. It depends on your availability, and you can talk about it with your supervisor. But that's what I did. And I brought a lot of change of clothes, toiletries, and blanket for comfort. And it depends. Every weekend, there's weekends that I only had 1 call, but there are weekends that I barely had enough time to eat and sleep. So it's important to eat and rest when you can, and it's important to be healthy and build your endurance. So where do we eat and who pays for it? In the hospital where I'm in, we were given meal tickets that we can use in the cafeteria, and this is what it usually looks like. There's buffet for for vegetable, like a vegetable salad bar. There's a station for sandwiches and burgers. There are place for drinks, different kind of drinks, and some sushi bar sometimes. It depends on the hospital what the food's going to be. But I noticed last year that there's not much options, and I heard that because they don't have a permanent chef, so maybe it has something to do with that. And I don't know about you guys, but I like this particular hospital food. Maybe I'm just weird, and it sounds like I'm promoting a hospital here, but really that's what their cafeteria is like. So it's important to know the opening and the closing times of the cafeteria, because they have that so that you won't miss any meal, and because you'll never know when the call's going to come in, so it's important to eat during downtime. And now let's talk about pagers. Yes, we still use them, and this is what it looks like. Don't be alarmed, they're gonna teach you on how to use that. But confession time, I only figure out that you can change the alarm setting during my last week of internship. So much for me paying attention. I hope you pay more attention than me. But there are different settings, and they'll teach you the codes that come in and what does it mean and stuff like that. If I remember correctly, there's a vibration setting. You can put or set like an alarm sound that will actually sound when a call comes in. And also, you can put it on silent. I personally prefer the vibration one, because when I'm already talking to another patient, it won't cause much disturbance, and I can just look at it, see what the call is about, wrap up the conversation, and then I can respond to that call. My fear was, if I'm doing the night shifts and the weekend shifts, if I can hear the call from the pagers, because I was a heavy sleeper. So I'm so scared that I'll miss a call because I can't hear or feel the pager. So what I literally did was I clip the pager on my hair. So my head will literally vibrate when a call comes in. Do I look hilarious? Yes, but it worked. So do whatever you can to make sure you won't miss any call. Actually, even now, every time I hear a vibration from a phone somewhere, I still jump out of my seat and looks like I'm gonna respond to an emergency. So that's how much the impact of the pagers to me. One of the biggest thing that I learned also is to embrace the silence and not to be an anxious presence. I learned not to be anxious by focusing on them and what they're going through and their experience, and not my own life experience. I learned to embrace the silence. If I don't have anything to say, I just stay there with them and not panicking in my head and not thinking like, oh, it's so silent. Am I gonna say something? What should I say? Or when I'm having a conversation, I am not so anxious thinking about what's my next question going to be, or do I have to talk about the church, or what about the Bible? Do I need to pray and stuff like that? It's okay to have a guide, but not a script, because if you go off script, or if your patient goes off the script, you're going to panic. So it's okay to have a guide, but being there and embracing the moment with them helped me not to be anxious and pay attention to what's going on in front of me. The longest shift that I had was 65 hours straight. I usually do that during the entire weekend from Friday to Monday. And the biggest learning that I had there is that it's okay to ask for help. When I did those shifts, I barely had a time to eat or sleep. I remember one 65-hour shift, I only had a burger and 2 bites of pizza that entire weekend, because I had 8 deaths in a row, 8 different patients that died in a row, and it was exhausting. And I didn't know that I can call chaplains that are off duty to assist or help if it gets really intense and hectic and there's a lot of calls coming in. I didn't know that. I thought because that I'm in charge for the weekend and I just have to deal with it. So I learned it the hard way. And I guess it's also my own pride that I was ashamed to ask for help, because it kind of means that I failed, that I can't handle the call for the entire weekend. So I learned that it's not a sign of weakness at all. So finally, after having those 365-hour shifts in a row, my last weekend, I asked a chaplain that is off duty to stand by so I can take a shower in peace and have my breakfast in peace. And that really helped a lot. Like, just knowing that it's okay to ask for help. Another thing is to have multiple sets of clothes. I always do that, not only for weekend shifts or overnight shifts, but even in just my day shifts. You'll never know what kind of call you're going to get. And fortunately for me, I have all kinds of bodily fluids that you can imagine land on me, not on purpose, but it happens. So I find it useful that I always have a change of clothes with me, because again, we're still working in the hospital and we don't want to walk around spreading everyone's germs. The most graphic or gory, messy call that I had were multiple stab wounds and gunshots. This is where even you're dressed up properly, you don't know what the call's gonna be. You walk in the ER and you step in a lot of blood, because again, they're working on them, and that's the least of the concern at the moment. But that was the most graphic or messiest call that I had. But the difficult part for me was if the patient is conscious and they're asking me something medical, or their loved one and they're asking me something medical. As a chaplain, we are not allowed to get involved in that because we are not from the medical field. So when they ask me, like, does it look like my bones are broken? And you can literally see it sticking out, but we can't say anything about it, or you could see the wounds and you can't say anything about it. So I find it helpful that I just say, just stay calm. The doctors and the nurses are doing their best to help you. And for the most part, it really helps them, just holding their hand and assuring them that the doctors and nurses are doing their best, and they just have to calm down while the medical people are doing that. And I find it helpful with the family as well, just to give them that assurance that the doctors and the nurses back there are doing their best to help their loved ones. The funniest call for me was when I was called to this particular room number because the patient died. So here I am, carrying my bereavement packet, preparing myself mentally that this is another death call. So knock on the door, I open the door, and this is what happened. So the patient was sitting up on her bed and looked at me the moment I opened the door. And I was so shocked and I froze. I didn't know what to do. I just stood there for a moment and I just said, "I'm sorry, wrong room number." And then I went out. And then I went back to the nurse station and I said, I am 101% sure that that patient in the room is not dead. She just looked at me. So the nurse was so confused. She clarified it with the station on what's going on, and it was just a classic misunderstanding. She thought that when she was asked to call the chaplain, she thought that because the patient in the room number died, but it was the patient's mother in the room that died. So it was the right room, right patient. It was just a different scenario at all. So what I did was I went back in, pretended that what happened earlier did not happen, and continued to provide comfort and support to the patient. Another funny moment is when I went to get a family back to the ER. Usually, when I get a family in the waiting room or in the family room, their loved one is either dead, actively dying, or in a critical condition. But not all the time. Not all the time. And some people know that. That's why they don't want to meet a chaplain while they're waiting in the ER, because they kind of have that assumption that it doesn't look good. But sometimes I just help assist a family to go back there because I'm on my way anyway. So one time I see that the reception staff are so busy with multiple people coming in. So I volunteered to take one family back to the ER where the loved one is, since I'm on my way back anyway. And this is what happened. Hello, I'll help you go back there. So yes, I didn't introduce myself as a chaplain because I know that will happen. So I just said, "Hi, I'm Wowie. I'll help you get back there." But because they read my ID and it says chaplain on it, he literally collapsed on the floor and said, "No!" And so I have to calm him down and explain myself that, yes, I am a chaplain, but I am just helping you go back there, and your loved one is totally okay. He is not dead. Nothing wrong is going on. I am just literally helping the staff because they're so busy at the moment. And that moment is when I realized that I can make somebody cry just by introducing myself as a chaplain. So probably not a good thing. The most difficult call for me was the death of a child. Providing comfort and support to the parents is not only my role for the day, but also to bring the tragic news to the younger sibling. In their grief, the parents can't bring themselves or can't bring the tragic news to their toddler, so they asked me if I could do it with them. And the only concept of death that this toddler have is in the death of their pet dog. He understood that because their pet died, they're not gonna see it again, but they will never forget their pet and they will always love him. So I used that same concept that he had to explain to him that his brother is now gone. However, they will never forget him and they will always love him, and his brother loves him very much. And that was very heartbreaking, especially during that time that I have to bring them back to the room to say their goodbyes. And it was very difficult, and I cried with them. And yes, we are allowed to cry. We are allowed to feel their pain as long as we remember that we don't own it. I also learned that the Lord God Almighty does not need a lawyer to fight in His defense. And what I mean by that is that it's okay for us to say, "I don't know," if we really don't know. Especially when I was being asked difficult questions that I can't really answer. They've been trying for a long time to have a baby, and then their baby didn't survive, and they asked me, why did God take their baby away? Why did God take their loving parents away? Why are they suffering from these diseases in spite of being good people? And when I can't answer these questions at the moment, I'm being honest with them, and I tell them that I don't know. And I learned that it's okay to say that we don't know. But what I tell them to provide some comfort and support is that what I do know is God is with them. He is crying with them. He is grieving with them. And sometimes that's all that I could say. So what's my typical intro during my room visits? What do I say and how do I make them talk? Something that my supervisor taught me is that the prayer is not only used at the end to wrap up the visit, but it could use it could be used in the beginning as well. So that's what I did. Sometimes I'll pray at the very beginning, and then after we pray, I'll ask them questions about it, like, oh, you asked me to pray for this and that. Is something going on there? Something like that. And then the conversation goes on from there. I always scan the room when I go in. I always want to pay attention to what's going on around them. So sometimes when I see flowers with cards, and then I ask them, oh, these are beautiful flowers and a card. Did the family visit you? And then the conversation goes on from there. Sometimes I ask them what brought them to the hospital. And with that conversation, sometimes it helps them realize the cause of why they ended up there, the cause of their stress or that specific heart attack or stroke. Sometimes they realize that they had a rough argument or relationship issues or receiving some bad news, something like that. And it gives them that awareness, and it helps facilitate some healing in a way. Was it awkward? Sometimes yes, but I learned to embrace that awkwardness because as a chaplain, our patients allow us to enter this special space. We are not attached to them personally, so they allow themselves to be completely vulnerable to us. They're temporarily removed from their usual routine, and being in the hospital kind of forced them to face whatever it is that they try to ignore. It is a privilege that they allow us to walk with them during this crisis moment in their life. Yes, it is important to build rapport so that they could be comfortable talking to us, but it's also okay to ask difficult and hard questions. So what was my first ER call look like? I told them on my very first day that I am scared of dead people. So if they could just give me a live patient, that would be fantastic. And I realized later on that my fear of dead people is because of all these horror movies that I watch, growing up, and allow my imagination to cripple me in that way. But I now realize that there's nothing about dead body and dead people that I should be scared of. But this is what happened during my very first call. So a call came in the pager, we looked it up, and then we responded in the ER. And I was shadowing one of our supervisors or mentors at that time. And so we both went to the ER, and we went inside the room, and it was dark. So I can see the patient lying down, but it was dark, so it was not very clear. So he left me there and said that he's gonna go to the waiting room and look for the family or next of kin. But if they showed up there first, then I should know what to do. And so I agreed. So he left me in the room, and I stayed there for a while, and the patient's really, really quiet. So I figured out that, maybe it was a bad car accident, because he's not saying anything. He's not snoring. I can't hear him breathe. Usually with the machines and all of that, you can hear those. So it was just so quiet. So I just stood there. And after a few minutes, a nurse came in. She noticed that the room is dark, so she turned on the light. And she said something like this. I appreciate what you guys do. Just staying with the disease while their family is not here yet. So thank you. And then she left. So I just smiled and nodded, acknowledged what she said. And then I was trying to understand what the nurse just said. Did she just say deceased? Like dead, deceased? So now that the light is on, I slowly turned my head and looked at the patient, and yes, I could tell from his color that he has passed for a while now. So I tried to be brave, put on a brave face, and stood there next to him and just pretending that there's nothing going on, and patiently waiting for my mentor to come back. And finally he did. with a grin in his face because he knew exactly what he did. And the family was with him, so we provided support and comfort during that time. But I know that my mentor needed to do that for me to face my own fears. And there's nothing really wrong with being with dead people. I enjoy it now because it's so peaceful. Now I realize that it is those that are living that I need to be careful of, and not the dead people. So that's all for my tips and tricks. Hopefully you'll find them helpful and useful. And I need to go back inside before... Is that a UPS truck? Yes, thank you UPS truck and driver for all that you do for all this online stuff delivering during this pandemic. So anywho, so yes, I need to go back inside before the child starts looking for me. Thank you for watching and listening to my stories. God bless you.